I never thought a single envelope could turn my family into strangers, but the day my stepsister inherited the house, everything we pretended was stable finally collapsed. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 28 years old. And this is the story of how my stepsister's unexpected inheritance ignited a bitter family dispute that changed how I see loyalty, family, and fairness forever. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day that doesn't prepare you for anything life-altering. I'd just come home from work, kicked off my shoes, and was reheating leftovers when my phone rang. It was my father. "Can you come by tonight?" he asked. His voice was tight, careful. "There's something we need to discuss as a family." I should have known then that nothing good ever starts with that sentence. An hour later, I was sitting at the long dining table in my childhood home in Raleigh, North Carolina. My dad sat at one end, fingers laced together. My stepmother, Diane, sat beside him, lips pressed thin. Across from me was my stepsister Vanessa, calm, composed, and unreadable. Between us lay a manila envelope. Dad cleared his throat. "This is from my brother's estate. My uncle Robert had passed away suddenly 3 months earlier. No spouse, no children. We'd attended the funeral, said our goodbyes, and assumed everything was settled quietly through lawyers and paperwork. None of us had expected this." Vanessa reached forward and slid the envelope toward herself. Opening it slowly, she read silently, eyes moving across the page. Then she inhaled sharply. "He left me the house," she said. The words landed like broken glass. "What?" Diane said, sitting up straighter. "The lake house," Vanessa clarified. "Uncle Robert left it to me, sole ownership." My chest tightened. That house had been part of our family for decades. Summers on the dock, Christmas mornings with frost on the windows. It wasn't just property, it was memory. Dad frowned. "That doesn't make sense. He always said he wanted it to stay in the family." Vanessa looked up. "I am family." No one argued that out loud, but something shifted in the room. "You have to understand the dynamic. Vanessa and I grew up under the same roof, but we never shared the same footing. Her mother married my dad when I was 13, Vanessa was 15. Already sharp-edged and fiercely independent. We were polite, civil, but never close. She spent more time with her biological father growing up. I stayed rooted here. That house, the lake house, felt like mine in a way I never questioned. Apparently, I was wrong." "He didn't mention this to anyone," Dad said slowly. "Why you?" Vanessa folded the letter carefully. "Because I took care of him." That surprised me. "What do you mean?" She finally looked at me. "I was the one who checked on him, drove him to appointments, paid his bills when he got confused. I didn't do it for this." But he noticed. Silence filled the room again. Diane spoke first. "So what happens now?" Vanessa's expression didn't change. "I'm keeping it just like that." No discussion. No acknowledgement of what that meant for the rest of us. Dad rubbed his temples. "Vanessa, that house was meant to be shared. Maybe you could sell it," she interrupted, "or split it." "That's not what he wanted." I felt heat rise in my chest. "You don't even come to the lake," I said before I could stop myself. "You barely spent time there." She met my gaze coolly. "That doesn't make it yours." The argument escalated quickly after that. Voices rose, accusations flew. Diane insisted Uncle Robert had been manipulated. Dad questioned the legality. I sat there, stunned, realizing how quickly love turned conditional when property was involved. Vanessa stayed calm. Through it all, too calm. When the meeting ended, she stood, grabbed her coat, and said, "I'll have my lawyer send copies of the will." Then she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. Her certainty, the way she'd said "I am family" like a challenge. For the first time, I wondered if we'd ever been on the same side at all. What I didn't know yet was that this inheritance wasn't just about a house. It was about power, and in the next part, I would learn just how far my stepsister was willing to go to keep it, even if it meant tearing the rest of us apart. The days after that meeting felt heavier than they should have. It wasn't just the shock of the inheritance, it was the way the atmosphere in our family shifted almost overnight. Group chats went quiet. Calls felt cautious, measured. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the lake house without actually naming it. Like we were all afraid saying the words out loud would make the damage permanent. Dad tried to be the peacemaker. He always had been. 2 days after Vanessa left with that envelope, he invited her back to talk things through calmly. I didn't want to go, but I did anyway. Part of me still believed there had to be some middle ground, some compromise that didn't leave everyone raw and resentful. Vanessa arrived alone again, confident as ever. She brought a folder this time. I had my attorney review everything, she said, setting it on the table. The will is airtight. Diane's face tightened. Robert wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Vanessa didn't flinch. He was thinking clearly enough to sign legal documents and express his wishes. I watched the exchange quietly, noticing how easily she spoke in absolutes. There was no hesitation. No warmth, just certainty. Dad leaned forward. No one's questioning that you helped him. We appreciate that, but that house has always been a shared place. Maybe you could consider letting us use it occasionally, holidays. Summers. Vanessa closed the folder. No, the word was simple. Final. You're cutting us out completely, I asked. I'm setting boundaries, she replied. Something this family struggles with. That stung more than I expected. She stood to leave again, but before she could, Dad said something that changed the tone of everything. If you keep it all to yourself, he said carefully, you're choosing property over family. Vanessa paused, hand on the back of the chair. No, she said quietly. I'm choosing myself. After she left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. That night, Diane cried in the kitchen while Dad stared out the window, silent and defeated. I went home feeling like something had cracked that couldn't be sealed again. A week later, the lawyer's letter arrived. It wasn't just confirmation of the inheritance. It was a formal notice stating that the property was now under Vanessa's sole ownership, and that all existing access keys, storage rights, documents were revoked effective immediately. My hands shook as I read it. She wasn't just claiming the house, she was erasing us from it. Dad drove to the lake house the next morning anyway. He wanted to retrieve some personal items, old fishing gear, family photos, things that had been there longer than Vanessa had known Uncle Robert. He took me with him. When we arrived, the locks had already been changed. I stood there staring at the door, my childhood reflected back at me in weathered wood and unfamiliar hardware. She didn't even tell us. I whispered. Dad knocked anyway. No answer. That was the moment anger finally broke through my disbelief. This isn't about gratitude, I said, it's about control. Dad didn't respond. He just sat on the dock, shoulders slumped. Looking older than I'd ever seen him. Later that afternoon, Vanessa called him. I heard you went to the house, she said. We wanted our things, Dad replied. I'll have them shipped, she said coolly. Please don't show up unannounced again. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You changed the locks, I said loudly enough for her to hear through the phone. That house was part of our lives, and now it's part of mine, she replied. You're not entitled to it just because you're emotional. The call ended shortly after. From that point on, the dispute stopped being private. Relatives started calling, taking sides. Some said Vanessa had every right, others said what she was doing was cruel. Family dinners became tense or stopped altogether. My dad's side barely spoke to my stepmother's side anymore. As if this inheritance had exposed fault lines that were always there, and through it all, Vanessa remained unmoved. She posted photos on social media weeks later. The lake at sunset, a glass of wine on the deck, a caption about new beginnings and honoring what was entrusted to me. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. That house hadn't just been entrusted to her. It had been taken from all of us. The worst part wasn't losing access to the property. It was realizing how easily she'd cut us off once she had what she wanted. How quickly family became optional when ownership was absolute. I started to question everything I thought I knew about her and about us. Because if a single inheritance could turn my stepsister into a stranger, then maybe she'd never seen us as family in the first place. And in the next part, the truth about why Uncle Robert chose her would come out, bringing with it consequences none of us were prepared for. The truth came out accidentally. It didn't arrive in a dramatic confession or a heated argument. It slipped into the open the way uncomfortable truths often do, through someone who didn't realize they heir holding a missing piece of the story. It was my cousin Mark who called me first. Hey, he said, sounding hesitant. I didn't know if I should say anything, but something about Uncle Robert's will doesn't add up. My heart started racing. What do you mean? Mark explained that he'd been helping his mother clean out old emails and paperwork related to Robert's estate, while sorting through digital records. He came across an email chain between Robert and Vanessa from about a year before his death. It wasn't unusual at first: updates, check-ins, reminders about appointments, but then the tone changed. She was pushing him, Mark said, about the house, about making sure it stayed secure. I felt a chill. Pushing how? She kept bringing up how no one else visited him, Mark replied. How the family only showed up during holidays, how she was the only one who really cared. My stomach twisted. Mark forwarded me screenshots. Reading them felt like watching a slow manipulation unfold. Vanessa never outright asked for the house. She didn't have to. Instead, she framed herself as the only reliable presence in Robert's life, subtly planting the idea that the rest of us were distant, unreliable, ungrateful. You deserve to know who's really there for you. I just want to protect you from people who might take advantage later. I'll make sure your wishes are respected. The messages made my skin crawl. I showed them to Dad that night. He read quietly, his face hardening with each line. When he finished, he didn't speak for a long time. She turned his loneliness into leverage. He said finally. Diane tried to defend her daughter at first. She said Vanessa was only looking out for Robert, that caring for someone doesn't automatically make you manipulative. But even she went quiet when Dad pointed out how often Vanessa emphasized being the only one. This wasn't about caregiving, it was about influence. A few days later, something else surfaced. Robert's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Klein, reached out after hearing about the dispute through town gossip. She asked if we were really locked out of the lake house. When Dad confirmed it, she sounded surprised. That's strange, she said. Robert always told me he wanted the place to stay available for the whole family. Those words hit hard. Mrs. Klein mentioned that Vanessa had been visiting frequently during Robert's last year, often staying overnight. She also mentioned something that made my heart pound. She brought paperwork over a few times, Mrs. Klein said she was helping him organize his affairs. I thought it was kind, organize his affairs. That phrase echoed in my mind. Dad contacted his lawyer the next morning. What followed was a careful, methodical review of the will. The dates, the witnesses, the circumstances under which it was signed. Nothing illegal jumped out immediately. But there were enough concerns to warrant deeper scrutiny, especially one detail: the will was updated just 6 weeks before Robert died, during a period when his health had declined sharply. That changed everything. Vanessa was notified that the estate was being reviewed due to concerns about undue influence. It wasn't an accusation yet, but it was enough to disrupt the sense of finality she'd been relying on. Her reaction was swift. She called Dad. Furious. How dare you question his wishes? She snapped. He knew exactly what he was doing. Did he? Dad asked calmly. Or did you convince him that the rest of us didn't care? She hung up. Within days, formal letters were exchanged between lawyers. Family members who had stayed silent suddenly felt emboldened to speak. Stories surfaced about how Vanessa had discouraged visits, how she'd insisted Robert was too tired when others tried to see him. The picture became clearer and uglier. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. And as the truth surfaced, I felt something complicated rise inside me. Not triumph, not relief, but grief. Grief for a family that had trusted too easily. Grief for a man whose final decisions may not have been fully his own. And grief for the realization that my stepsister had been willing to sacrifice all of us for a piece of property. Vanessa stopped posting photos of the lake house after that. She went quiet, but silence didn't mean surrender, it meant preparation, because in the next part, the dispute would move from whispered revelations to open confrontation, and Vanessa would make a move that would fracture our family beyond repair. The confrontation happened sooner than any of us expected. Vanessa didn't wait for the lawyers to finish their review. She didn't try to smooth things over or pretend nothing was happening. Instead, she went straight to the one place she knew would hurt the most: our family's unity. She called a family meeting. Not at our parents' house. Not at a neutral place. She invited everyone to the lake house. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dad almost didn't go. Diane begged him to let the attorneys handle it, but something in him needed to see her face to face. Needed to hear her explain herself without lawyers speaking for her. I went with him. partly to support him and partly because I knew this was a turning point. Whatever happened next would change things permanently. When we arrived, the house looked exactly as it always had. Same weathered dock, same pine trees framing the water, same familiar creak of the porch steps, but the feeling was different. Like walking into a place that remembered you. Even if the people inside didn't, Vanessa stood on the deck waiting for us. She'd arranged chairs in a loose circle like this was some kind of mediation. Diane was already there, arms folded tightly. A few extended relatives had come too, drawn by curiosity or concern. Everyone looked uneasy. Vanessa didn't waste time. I know there's been a lot of gossip, she began, a lot of assumptions, so I wanted to address this directly. Dad spoke first. We found the emails. Vanessa, her jaw tightened. Of course you did, you isolated him, he said. You made him believe the rest of us didn't care. That's not true, she snapped. You didn't show up, I stepped forward. We tried. You turned people away, her eyes flashed. Because he was exhausted. Because he didn't need visitors who made him feel like an obligation. The argument erupted from there. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, relatives chimed in with stories they'd kept quiet about until now, times they'd been discouraged from visiting. Calls that went unanswered, information filtered through Vanessa alone, for the first time. She wasn't in control of the narrative. You're all acting like I'm some villain, she said, voice shaking. I was the one there when he was scared, when he couldn't remember what day it was, when he needed help. No one's denying that. Dad said quietly, but care doesn't give you ownership. That sentence landed hard. Vanessa looked around the circle, realizing something crucial. The sympathy she expected wasn't there. Not fully, not anymore. Her tone shifted. Fine, she said sharply. Let's be honest then. None of you cared about that house until it had value. I earned it. You earned memories that didn't belong to you alone, I said, and you decided to lock everyone else out. She turned to me, eyes cold. You've always resented me. That's not true, I replied. I resented being treated like I didn't matter. Something broke then, Vanessa laughed. But there was no humor in it. This family has always been divided. I just stopped pretending. Otherwise, she turned to her mother. You taught me that. You said people only look out for themselves. Diane went pale. I never meant, you didn't have to, Vanessa cut in. I learned. The silence that followed was thick and final. Dad stood. This ends now, he said. The lawyers will handle it. But understand this, whatever happens with the house. You've lost something far more important. Vanessa said nothing. We left shortly after, no hugs, no resolution, just the heavy understanding that this wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a fracture. That night, Dad admitted something he'd never said out loud. I don't recognize her, he said quietly. I understood. The person we thought we knew had been replaced by someone who valued control over connection. A week later, the lawyer called with an update. The case was moving forward. There was enough evidence to question undue influence. It would be long, painful, public. Vanessa responded by cutting off contact completely. She blocked numbers, stopped answering emails through her attorney. She accused us of harassment and emotional abuse. The narrative flipped again. More aggressively this time. Family members picked sides definitively now. Some walked away entirely, unwilling to deal with the conflict. Others rallied closer than ever, bonded by shared disillusionment, and me. I stood in the middle, grieving a stepsister who was still alive and a family that would never look the same, because no matter how the legal fight ended, one truth was already clear. The inheritance hadn't just sparked a dispute over property, it had exposed the cost of choosing possession over people, and in the final part, I would have to decide what justice actually meant and whether winning was worth what we'd already lost. By the time the dispute reached its final stage, I realized something unsettling. I no longer cared about the house the way I once had. The lake house had been the symbol that started everything, the trigger that exposed jealousy, manipulation, and resentment that had been buried for years. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about property and started being about truth, about accountability, about whether family bonds meant anything when tested by power. The legal process dragged on for months. Depositions, statements, quiet investigations that pulled our family history into fluorescent-lit conference rooms. Emails were reviewed. Witnesses spoke. Medical timelines were examined closely. It was exhausting and humiliating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every private moment felt picked. Apart eventually, the verdict came. The court ruled that while Uncle Robert had legally signed the will, there was sufficient evidence of undue influence during his final months. The inheritance would not be overturned entirely, but it would be restructured. The lake house would be placed into a family trust. Vanessa would retain partial ownership, but not exclusive control. Access would be shared. Major decisions would require agreement. The locks would be changed again, not to keep people out, but to ensure no one held absolute power. When Dad told me, I felt empty, not disappointed, not relieved, just tired. Vanessa didn't attend the final hearing. Her attorney delivered a brief statement on her behalf, emphasizing that she stood by her intentions and felt deeply betrayed by false accusations. Even in the end, she couldn't fully acknowledge what she'd done. After the ruling, she sent one message: I hope this was worth it. I stared at my phone for a long time before replying. I didn't do this to win. I did it to stop pretending. She never responded. That was the last time we spoke. The family didn't magically heal after that. Some wounds were too deep. Some trust too damaged. Holidays became smaller, quieter, more intentional. A few relatives drifted away completely, unwilling to revisit the pain. But something unexpected happened too. The people who stayed grew closer. Dad started spending more time at the lake again, not to reclaim ownership, but to reconnect with memories without bitterness attached. Diane stepped back from defending and started listening. Really listening. For the first time in years, the house itself felt lighter somehow. Less like a prize and more like what it had always been, meant to be: a place, not a weapon. As for me, I learned a hard truth I wish I'd known sooner. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. You can honor the past without sacrificing the present. And you don't have to stay silent just to keep the illusion of peace. Vanessa chose control over connection. I chose clarity. And while that choice cost me a stepsister I once hoped to understand better, it gave me something more important: a sense of self that no one else could leverage or manipulate. Today, when I think about the lake house, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel acceptance. It's just wood and water and memories. What mattered was never the property. What mattered was learning who people become when something valuable is at stake. If you're listening to this and facing a family conflict over money, inheritance, or control, I want you to hear this. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you greedy. Asking for fairness doesn't make you cruel. And walking away from manipulation doesn't mean you lost. Sometimes, the real inheritance isn't property at all. It's the clarity that comes when you finally see people as they are and choose yourself anyway.